Terrence McDevitt, Solution Architect with Bluefish Development Group. This is part 3 of a 3-part series about aspects in Alfresco. The last 2 parts we talked about defining an aspect, what it is, how you actually get it into the repository. This part is how you expose that aspect into the Share UI. A lot of our clients have been asking for this. How do we do this? We've got the aspect defined, we can't seem to figure out how to get into the Share UI. So today we're going to talk about that. So we'll go ahead and move into the good stuff. We'll show a little code, and we'll actually see this in action in Share. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and step through the process for getting an aspect to show up in the Share UI. If you watched the previous video, we talked about defining your aspect in your content model, deploying that to the repository, and verifying that it was deployed there. Right now, what we're going to do is kind of focus on the Share UI. It's the main interface that most people tend to use when they're working with Alfresco. So exposing that aspect into that UI is a pretty important thing to do. So I've got a document up that I'm looking at here. And you will often notice this in the document details listing. There's some options down here like manage aspects and change type. If you've ever played with the manage aspects piece, you'll get a little dialog that comes up with a whole bunch of out-of-the-box Alfresco aspects that you can attach to your document. You'll notice that there is not one in this list called signature details, the one that we're actually using in this example. So what we're going to do is go ahead and walk through the process of how one would add that item into the repository, into Share. So there's 2 key pieces to this. One is having your context file that is responsible for telling Share which of your customizations you want to load. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how this process works, but it's important. It's something that we've noticed quite a bit of people getting tripped up on, is that unless you have the surf override context file defined, then your contexts are not going to load properly, and people tend to spend a lot of time debugging that. So we've got a document in our directory structure under extensions surf override, and it's a context file. And in that context file, we have a few beans defined, one for our properties and one for the context files that sort of configure Share. If you don't have this, your stuff's not going to load, so it's important that you have it. And this is pretty much the extent of what this file looks like. What's important here is in the config bootstrap that's going to get invoked by surf, we want to load up our XML files. And the one that we're mainly focused on for this demo is document library. We've got some other XML files defined for advanced searching and for the document listing screen, but we're really focused on something here called document library. The name of your XML files doesn't really matter as long as this value here properly points to that document or to that XML file. So let's go ahead and open up Sandbox Share Document Library. It's the context file. Sorry, one second. It's Sandbox Share Document Library, and in here we've got some configuration defined. Now this is just sort of based on some of the out-of-the-box configuration that comes with Share. But basically what this is saying here up in this config block is saying, hey, anytime I'm in the document library, if I'm looking at something, then this is the configuration I want to apply. And there's a whole block in here on aspects. And we want to define an aspect that we want to show, the signature details aspect that we want to show in Share. Well, what does it mean to show it in Share? There's a few places that aspects can show up. There's the visible aspect, which means when someone goes in and says, hey, I want to create a rule that, or if I want to go in and say manage aspects, if I add it to the visible element, then that aspect will show up under manage aspects. If I want to define what's considered addable, I can do that as well under addable or removable. So if I want to remove things from, let's say, a rule, if I want to remove an aspect in a rule, or if I want to add an aspect in a rule, this is where I would define those. If you don't define anything in these blocks, it will just take whatever's defined in visible. So you really only have to define it in one place. You'll notice under visible, we've got a reference to the aspect we created in part in the previous session called BFG Core Signature Details. So really, that's all we have to do in order to have that aspect appear in the Share UI. So we have to have the context set up, which is what we just showed, and then right now we've got to have in the context file that we point to, we at least have to put in the aspect under the visible tag. And once we've saved that and built our AMP and deployed that AMP and started Share, then we'll be able to go in and sort of see that aspect in action. Okay, so we've gone through the process of saving our changes and deploying the AMP out into our app server and restarted Tomcat. And now we're looking at share again, but now if I go to the Manage Aspects action over on the Document Actions section on the right and scroll down, we'll see an aspect called Signature Details. This is the aspect that we created. If I go ahead and hit the plus, it basically attaches at this point, well, if I hit apply, it attaches the aspect to that document. Now, just by doing that doesn't really seem to really do anything, but if I go to the Edit Properties sheet and come down here, you'll notice that there are some additional attributes that are defined here and some different additional fields that don't show up for regular CM content objects. And those are the ones that I created. So is document signed, I've got a little date chooser for the execution date, and I can go ahead and save that. Now, the nice thing about aspects is that I just associated or attached that aspect to this particular node, this particular document. If I were to load up some new documents in my repository, and let's call them contract types or MSA or NDA types, whatever we want those types to be, it doesn't necessarily mean that those objects have to have those properties. That's kind of the beauty of having the aspects. You can attach them when you want to. Now, sometimes people will want to do that manually and say for a document I want to attach this aspect, or you may want to do it programmatically. You can certainly do this in some Java backing code if you've got some custom code that you've got in your solution. But you can also do this through rules. So the customization that we made where we added the aspect into the Share UI, one of the places that will now show up is under the rules editor in Share. So if I were to define a rule in here, I could say, let's add an aspect to anything that comes into this folder, and you'll notice that there is a signature details aspect in here. So anything that comes in will automatically have that signature details aspect added. I can also remove the aspect, and that will show up in the list as well if there's already an aspect on that document. So that's really the process for getting the aspect to show up in Share. One of the things that I wanted to point out is a key attribute of the configuration. So up here, there's a little thing that says it's an attribute called replace, and we've set that to false. And what that says to basically to Share is, hey, we're going to define this configuration, but this configuration is in addition to whatever other configurations have been defined. And so if you were to say replace equals true, then anytime you go to that Manage Aspects dialog in Share, you would only see things that are defined in this configuration. So most likely you're probably going to want to keep some of the out-of-the-box Alfresco aspects and not override them or not remove them from the list, I guess. So the best thing to do would be to define replace equals false. Now, one of the things that we didn't really touch on is how the aspect fields show up in the repository or in Share. If you've dealt with creating forms before for custom types, then you're probably familiar with the process of showing those fields and so forth. And that's exactly how it works with aspects. It's really treated almost the same way. I'm showing a form configuration file right now, and at the end of it, we've just got a config element that says, okay, anytime that we hit a BFG core signature detail, then here's how we want to display or render those fields on the form. Very, very simple. We just define the fields we want to show, and then any of the actual appearance properties for that field. Right now, we're just using default fields. But that's it. Once you've kind of touched on all of those pieces and saved your context file, saved the surf override context file to load your context, and then defined any of the field definitions in the form, then you're good to go. You'll be able to add aspects, you'll be able to remove them, and then you'll also be able to see the values of those aspects in any of the forms for documents that have that aspect attached. So let's go ahead and recap what we talked about today. We took the aspect that we created in the previous session and actually exposed that into the Share UI via customizations. And that aspect now shows up under the Manage Aspects dialog. It shows up under folder rules. So now users can actually really use the aspect that we created. This concludes the three-part series on aspects. Prior to today's session, we talked about what an aspect was and how it could be useful for your business. In the second part, we talked about how to actually define that aspect and put it into the repository. And then we wrapped up today with exposing that aspect in the Share UI. If you'd like to watch more of our videos, you can do that via the Bluefish TX channel on YouTube. Thanks for watching today. Take care.